Episode 4 of Rick and Morty Season 9 ends with Rick draining flask after flask of vodka, telling Morty he's going to end up exactly the same way. It's been framed online as the big gut punch of the episode, the moment everyone's clipping, the moment everyone's calling the alcoholism episode. But that's not actually the diagnosis. The drinking is just a symptom that finally showed up on camera where everyone could see it. The real disease has been sitting in plain sight since episode 2. Rick spent all of episode 3 denying it to a man's face, and episode 4 spent its entire runtime proving him wrong. Here's the actual read. Rick doesn't have a drinking problem. He has a conflict problem. He has only ever felt like a coherent person when something was actively trying to kill him. And for the first time in this show's history, nothing is. No multiversal nemesis. No rogue version of his own grandson with a god complex. No war, just a guy in a garage, sober enough to notice the silence. Let's build this properly, episode by episode. Episode 2 is the first crack, and it's easy to miss because it's dressed up as a joke. Rick has this trick he's clearly used before. When the weight of being himself gets too heavy, he wipes his own memory for a stretch and goes and lives somewhere simpler, somewhere nobody's ever heard of the Citadel or an Omega device. It's marketed to himself as a vacation. It isn't. A vacation is something you come back from the same person. This is closer to a temporary resignation from his own life. And it works fine, repeatedly, until it doesn't. Until the blank memory wiped version of him standing in for Rick on that planet starts piecing together who he actually is underneath the wipe and tries to run from it. That's the detail worth sitting with. Even the version of Rick that doesn't remember being Rick, the moment he gets close to finding out, wants out. Nobody in this universe wants to be Rick Sanchez, not even Rick Sanchez. Several layers removed from himself. That's not a throwaway gag. That's the show quietly establishing in episode 2, that escaping his own identity isn't a one-time crisis for Rick, it's a maintenance routine, something he does on a schedule. Hold on to that, because episode 3 is where the show stops being subtle about it. Rick Fu Hustle hands you the thesis statement directly, and then Rick has to reject it on screen in real time. The setup looks disposable. A fender bender escalates into a fight with a wandering martial artist named Lu Sin, who puts a literal heart-exploding death touch on Rick over what should have been a parking lot apology. But buried in the middle of all the kung fu choreography and the Hawaiian Punch mascot subplot is a genuinely unguarded scene. Lu Sin admits he caused the collision on purpose. He tells Rick, plainly, that he's lonely, and that conflict is the only language he actually knows how to connect through. It's the only door he has into another person, and then he turns the question back on Rick. Is it the same for you? Rick says no. That's the moment the whole video hinges on. Not because it's loud, it isn't. It's a beat sandwiched between a fight and a punchline. Easy to let slide past you. But it's the moment because everything else this season says he's lying, including to himself. Think about what's actually held Rick's sense of self together for years now. Rick Prime, Evil Morty. Two ongoing, all-consuming conflicts that gave every version of Rick across the multiverse a reason to wake up with a target and a purpose. And by the start of season 9, both are gone. Rick Prime's dead, has been since season 7. Evil Morty's been swept off the board entirely, picked up by the time cops. No longer something Rick has to actively outthink or survive. For the first time in a long time, nobody's hunting Rick, and Rick isn't hunting anybody back. He's not at war with the universe anymore. He's just a guy. And just a guy might be the one role Rick Sanchez has never once successfully played. So when Lu Sin asks if conflict is the only thing keeping him tethered to who he is, no isn't just an answer, it's a flinch, a reflex. And the show makes you wait exactly one episode before it takes that denial apart, piece by piece, in front of him. Episode 4 is the receipt. Eureka runs through it. Opens with Rick already too drunk to remember the password to his own lab, locking himself out of the one space in the universe that's supposed to be entirely his. And what unfolds from there isn't really about Reese, or the fishing trip, or the two-factor authentication subplot, even though that's the machinery the episode runs on. It's about what Rick builds the moment there's no external enemy left to organize his life around. He builds a person. Reese isn't a friend Rick happens to have. Reese is a contingency plan wearing a friend's face. A backup system engineered for the exact moments when Rick's own coping mechanisms inevitably fail him. And when Morty finds out, when he realizes the warmth he felt on that fishing trip was running on a circuit board the whole time, it breaks something in him. Because it means even Rick's good days, the ones that felt real, are manufactured now. There's no version of Fine left that isn't built. And underneath all of it sits the thing this season has actually been building towards since the end of last season. Rick didn't just lose Diane years ago, he made an active, deliberate choice in the season 8 finale to erase what was left of her from his own head, specifically so he could try to become a more open version of himself. That was supposed to read as progress, a surgical fix, cut out the grief at the root, make room for something new to grow in its place. But you can't excise the thing that gave your pain its shape, and expect whatever's left underneath to just sort itself out on its own. Rick removed the memory. He didn't remove the hole it left behind. He just stopped being able to name it. And without Diane to mourn, without Rick Prime to chase, without evil Morty to outmaneuver, that hole doesn't have anywhere left to go. So by the end of episode 4, with no war left to fight and no grief left to consciously metabolize, Rick does the only thing he has left in his toolkit. He drinks until he doesn't have to be whoever this quieter, conflictless version of himself is supposed to be. And he tells Morty, flatly, almost as a warning, that the kid is going to end up exactly the same way. That's not a confession about alcohol. That's a confession about what's left of Rick Sanchez, once you strip away every conflict he's ever used to avoid sitting still inside his own head. So no, Rick's real addiction isn't alcohol. It's needing something across from him to fight. It's needing a war to give his days shape. And right now, for the first time in 9 seasons, there's nothing left standing on the other side of the ring. The bottle isn't a problem. The bottle is just what's left over once you take away everything Rick actually relies on to feel like a person worth being. Whether the back half of the season hands him something new to fight, a new Lucin, a new mirror, a new war, or just makes him sit in that silence a while longer and actually face it, is honestly one of the most interesting questions this show has asked in years. If you want more breakdowns like this one as the rest of the season drops, this is exactly kind of the deep dive we're doing, so make sure you're subscribed to Twisted Television.